Howdy my totally always tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a fun video for you. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 modern games that flew under the radar. Now recently I was invited to a collab from a fellow YouTuber, David Vink RPGs, and that video was about 20 RPGs that flew under the radar. And I'm very grateful that he invited me. It was very nice of him, but it got me thinking, what are 10 modern games that have really flown under the radar? Of course, we're not sticking to just RPGs, I'm just talking in general. Games that, you know, aren't the very best, they're not the 10 out of 10s, but they're still good to great or even really great games that just didn't get the recognition they deserve, and I don't hear enough people talking about them. Call them under the radar, call them hidden gems, call them underrated. These are 10 modern games that in my opinion really didn't get enough love. They didn't get enough love when they came out, and they still don't get enough nowadays, and this video is going to be praising them. As always, let me know down below how you're feeling, how you feel about the list and the games. Let me know of some underrated games you know of, or maybe some hidden gems that you don't think got enough love. I mean, I'm always on the lookout for new games, and I'm always reading the comments, so please like, share, comment, subscribe. We got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. And with all that, let's really get into it. Now, while making this list, like, the very first game I thought of was actually Sniper Elite 5, and that's not just because Rebellion sent me a code a while back. I am very grateful they sent a code, though. That is very cool, and so thank you. But I actually did think of the entire Sniper Elite franchise as a whole. The Sniper Elite franchise is pretty underrated. I don't hear nearly enough people talk about this series, and it's actually been around quite a long time, and it's been very consistent as well. Really, since V2, there's been a Sniper Elite game every few years, but to pick on just one, I'm gonna go with Sniper Elite 5, which I believe to be really like the best of the entire Sniper Elite series. And so if you're unfamiliar with the Sniper Elite series, it's a series of third and first person shooters set in World War II. Where, as the title implies, you're an elite sniper. You're usually dropped into some area told to go kill some Nazis or to go blow their shit up. Really, you're just trying to stop the Nazis from doing basically anything. And that's the case with Sniper Elite 5. While this game does have a story, the story in the Sniper Elite games, I mean, it's just kind of there. It's just a means to an end, and it just gives you more scenarios to kill Nazis. This series really shines with the gameplay. Sniper Elite 5 looks at the fourth game and really expands on it. Every single mission drops you into this relatively large area where you're usually given multiple objectives, and then you can go about those objectives in a variety of different ways. It's actually more like the newer Hitman games versus the older Sniper Elite games. For instance, the second mission has you going into a castle to get into a room to steal some Nazi documents. How you get in there is entirely up to you. You can be stealthy, you can sneak your way into the castle, taking everyone out quietly, trying to hide and muffle your sniper shots, or you can just go in guns blazing and kill everybody. And then how you actually get into the room, you can use a satchel charge, or you can try to sneak in, climb in. And really every single mission is like this, where there's a variety of different ways to go about it. You can be very stealthy in Sniper Elite, and it's actually fun to be stealthy in this game. It's different from other stealth games, as you actually have to really muffle your sniper shots, or you can go in with the well rod, and it's not half-ass implemented like, say, Sniper Elite 3, where there was only a few scenarios it felt like that let you be stealthy. No, you can be very stealthy in every single mission in this game, or you can go loud. Either way, soon enough you'll find one of Sniper Elite's defining moments, which is the X-ray kills, where the game just really shows how much damage you're doing to someone. You just completely ruin them. And Sniper Elite 5 is easily the goriest of the Sniper Elite games. Like, it is brutal. The X-ray kills are just crazy in this game. It's like Mortal Kombat levels of brutal, and you know, it's actually pretty awesome. The shooting in general is very good in this game. It feels great. You can go first person with any weapon, which is really nice. It just has a great feel to it. The game actually is very polished, and there's not a bad mission here. They're all different from each other. There's a good amount of variety. You go to several different locations. They've all got a decent length to them. You can play the entire game in co-op. There's even a Deathloop style invasion PvP mode that is actually really awesome. This is way better than I thought it would be, and it low-key is better than Deathloops. Like, obviously from a narrative perspective it's not, but it's actually pretty fun. This game is actually pretty fun. It looks nice, it sounds nice, the gameplay is solid, and I think these are some of the best missions of the entire Sniper Elite franchise. Why this game didn't get a ton of recognition, I have no idea. Maybe because it's the fifth game in the series, maybe it's just straight up fatigue of the Sniper Elite franchise. Either way, I very much recommend this game. If you like shooters, if you like World War II games, or you've played any of the other Sniper Elite games, I think you're going to enjoy this one. And so another game that I don't think gets enough attention is Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. Now, while I'm sure most of you have at least heard of Digimon, how many of you have actually played a Digimon game, let alone a good Digimon game? Now, when it comes to Digimon as like a game franchise, I'll be the first to admit that a lot of these games aren't very good. Usually they have like one crippling flaw that just kind of messes up the entire game, but that's where Cyber Cyber Sleuth is different. This is low-key like the best Digimon game, period. The game is actually quite story-focused. There's a lot of dialogue and cutscenes, there's plenty of different characters, and it's about the digital world and hackers and even more that I don't want to spoil because the story is actually decent to good here, especially towards the end. There's some really interesting twists and I like where the story goes here. It does have a little bit of a slow start, I'll be the first to admit, but it really did grow on me. Something else that grew on me was the gameplay. The gameplay is a relatively traditional JRPG with monster catching. A lot of Digimon games really have their own battle system, a bunch of unique mechanics that just don't really work very well, and this game, yeah, they go the traditional route and I think it works actually very well. The game has plenty of battles to it and the battles are actually decent with type advantages and even a little bit of strategy. It still is relatively basic, I mean it's not super complex, but at least the game has a good speed to it. The battles are over pretty quick and for the most part I found them enjoyable. I'm not going to say, you know, it's the best battle system of any JRPG, but it's decent for what it is. Where this game really excels though is when you actually get Digimon and digivolving them. See, you don't just catch them like it's Pokemon or Pal World or anything. You actually have to fight enough of them so then you can create your own out of digital matter. And then from there you'll level it up and you can evolve it. You can even de-evolve it, and there is actual reasons as to why you'd want to de-evolve it, but it's not like Pokemon where it's just straight, you know, Charmander to Charmeleon to Charizard. No, usually there's a bunch of different options when it comes to evolving them. Sometimes there's up to like 8 or 9 different options. There's entire trees when it comes to evolving these Digimon, and it's really cool just how many different Digimons you can get from that original one. The most fun I had with this game was just evolving a bunch of them, de-evolving, and seeing how many different Digimon I could get and seeing how good some of them were. And what's great is the game isn't super grindy. There is actually a Tamagotchi style farm where they can just sit in there and level up as you're playing the game. And so then you come back and you've got a bunch of Digimon to digivolve and you start getting a bunch of different weird looking ones, and it's a blast. I really had a lot of fun just evolving them over and over and seeing what they can do in battle. And all of this comes together to create a pretty decent to fun gameplay loop. The game's got a decent length of like 30 to 40 hours. The presentation, while it is very simple since it was a Vita game originally, it gets the job done and the music is pretty decent. If you've ever had any interest in the Digimon series, you're looking for another monster catching game that isn't Pal World or Pokemon, I totally think this is the one to play. It does enough different things to really have its own identity from Pokemon, and it's one of the best monster catching games to come out in the last 10 plus years in my opinion. And I'd argue it really is the best Digimon game. There is a sequel to this game, Hacker's Memory, but I haven't really played a ton of it and it wasn't catching me like this game did. I don't know, I just wasn't enjoying it as much. But Cyber Sleuth, that's a good one. And so here's another game that I believe from day one never got enough recognition, and that is the Mad Max video game. Now I very much remember when this game came out in 2015, gosh, almost 10 years ago. It came out the same day as Metal Gear Solid 5. And really, since then, I feel like not enough people have played this game, and I don't see enough people talking about this game. Is it perfect? Is it one of the very best open world games ever? No, but I still think it's actually quite good, and it pays great homage to the Mad Max movies. And I love those movies, especially Fury Road, and this is really like Fury Road the video game. The game, like the movies, takes place in a post-apocalyptic desert and sees Max going after the ones who wronged him. The game was developed by Avalanche, the people who made Just Cause, and just like Just Cause, there's a massive open world for you to explore here. There's so much desert, it's not even funny, and it actually looks very good. It looked great for the time, and I think it looks great here. One of the best looking deserts in a game. But what are you doing in this desert? Well, it's not the most far off from any other open world game. There's plenty of outposts, you have some main missions, there are the occasional side missions, and you'll get into a lot of fights. This game has two types of fighting. There's on-foot combat, where it very much is like the Batman Arkham games, and I think this is pretty decent. It gets the job done. And then there's the car combat, and I think the car combat is fun in this game. It doesn't have a ton of depth to it, and usually you're just smashing into other cars, but it feels nice and I really did enjoy it. The driving in general I think actually is quite good and it's enjoyable, and you do get some cool unique abilities for the car to make the car combat and just driving in general more fun. I really enjoy just how vast this open world is. It really is just this massive sandbox, this apocalyptic wasteland, and this isn't like Fallout where there's stuff all over the place. No, it's just a blank ass desert and you just drive and drive and drive, and most games, yeah, it'd probably feel rather empty, but it really works for Mad Max. This game just has a great atmosphere to it, and while it's not exactly innovative and it doesn't have the best open world or the most detailed, and it doesn't have a ton of amazing compelling gameplay loops, it still all comes together in a way that I really did enjoy. I enjoyed it back then, I love it nowadays. I really did like 100% this game. I found absolutely everything and just had so much fun doing it. Sure, it does get a bit old and it can very easily get repetitive, especially if you've played a lot of open world games, but I don't know, it just something about this game, it really just clicked for me. Maybe it was that it was just Mad Max. Like, I've wanted a good Mad Max game forever, and this game, it really was what I'm looking for. I hope in the future one day we get a sequel or another Mad Max game in the spirit of this. I doubt it at this point. I don't think the game sold all that well. I think maybe Mad Max is just not mainstream enough. I'm really not sure. Releasing it on the same day as MGS5 was definitely not a good idea, but here we are almost 10 years later and I'm still hyping the game up. I'm still gassing it up. I very much think it is a good game and it's really cheap now, so if you have any interest in Mad Max, this one is very much worth playing. So for this list, I wanted to include at least one fighting game, and I'm going with the Samurai Showdown reboot. You know, over the last decade, there's been a ton of underground, neglected fighting games, but of them all, this is one of my favorites. Now, Samurai Showdown is a very long-standing fighting game franchise. I actually did rank all of the games. There's over a dozen Samurai Showdown games, but none of them even come close to hitting the way that the reboot does. The reboot absolutely understands what Samurai Showdown was about, and it is a ton of fun. And while the game certainly has a pro scene still, I feel like it is much smaller than it should have been, and the game just did not have the longevity that I believe it deserved. I mean, this is really Samurai Showdown at its best, where it's a brutally punishing, slow, methodical fighting game where one attack can seriously take like a third, if not more, of your life. Timing and blocking and parrying and just general evading is really important in Samurai Showdown, as opposed to, you know, just a button masher or you just do a bunch of flashy combos. There really are no combos in Samurai Showdown. You just do some big ass attacks and one of you dies. There's really never been another fighting series like Samurai Showdown, and this game takes it to another level, and it is so much fun. You know, the game has a pretty decent to good roster with a bunch of the fan favorites, a few new characters, there was some good DLC, and then you just go at it. The game looks great, I love the art style, and it feels so good. Like, it feels incredible. It is beyond satisfying, especially when you land those really heavy big hits that take like a half of your opponent's life. Like, that's the good shit. It feels so good, and it just never gets old. And then the game actually had some content as well, with like a story mode, the typical arcade mode, and the online was pretty decent. There's actually depth here as well. Like, why this game didn't take off, I'm not entirely too sure. All I can think of is that it just didn't sell all that well. I mean, it's by SNK, and yeah, a lot of their games don't really sell all that well, especially outside of King of Fighters. But man, that's just so disappointing. This game deserves so much more because it really is like the best of the Samurai Showdown series. It just feels so good, and it plays so differently from like every other fighting game. Maybe that's why it didn't pick up, is because all the anime fighter fans didn't gravitate to it, or the King of Fighters faithful. I don't know. Either way, it didn't get the recognition it deserves. I'm here to hype it up. If you're looking for one of the best, most underrated fighting games of the last decade, easy, Samurai Showdown is a great pick. It was awesome then, it's great now, it's fun by yourself, it's fun with a buddy. There are still people playing the game. It's not like totally dead or anything. It's not as alive as several other fighting game franchises, and I wish this one took off even a little bit more, but still is a very good game. And so here's a game I hold very near and dear to my heart, and that is Earth Defense Force 5, also known as EDF 5. Now, the entire EDF series honestly belongs on this list. It's a very underground, niche, and just straight up underrated series where you kill just a ton of giant bugs. Sure, these games have their issues, they're not the most polished, and they very well can get repetitive since they all set out to do one thing and only one thing, and that's kill giant bugs. But EDF 5, man, this game just, it really does hit different. It's one of the craziest video games I've ever played. It's also just straight up some of the most fun I've ever had with a video game. Every mission is exactly the same. It's just kill everything. If it moves, destroy it, unless it's your teammates and you're playing in co-op. Every mission just sees giant bugs, or really just giant enemies showing up and trying to just destroy everything, and so you gotta just take them out. The game is a third-person shooter where you can select between 4 very different classes, and yeah, it really is all about killing these fucking bugs. And it really is just big, dumb, and fun. Like, all of the classes feel different from each other. There's just a standard ranger where you get like shotguns and machine guns. There's this big heavy tank like class known as the fencer, and they get to use melee. There's the air raider where you get to call in vehicles and airstrikes, and then there's the wing diver, which is very fragile but they can fly around, and all of them come together to just destroy everything. When it comes to like level design, there really is like no level design in this game outside of the caves. You usually just dropped into one really big area with a bunch of buildings or rice fields, and yeah, you just destroy everything. As you're killing enemies, you'll quickly see buildings also collapsing, and it's not uncommon where the entire city's just been decimated by the end of the mission, but as long as all the bugs are gone, that's all that matters. And the enemy roster is easily the best of all the EDF games. There's actually a lot of stuff you kill. Of course, there are plenty of bugs, but there's a bunch of other enemies like these giant frogs that take cover behind buildings, a bunch of different types of robots, straight up dragons show up, even basically Godzilla is here, and then you actually get to see the aliens. The aliens do show up here, and they are not messing around. They will kick your ass. But you get plenty of amazing weapons and vehicles to use as well. Seriously, the vehicles in this game are so much fun to use. Some of them are wild, like the walking fortress, and all of the guns feel nice. The shooting is exceptional in this game. It feels so good. It's incredibly satisfying. When you destroy enemies, they just blow into chunks, and it really just never gets old. And then there are so many missions to this game. Like, you can easily spend like 40 or 50 hours just going through all the missions on one difficulty as one class, and then you can replay them on several different difficulties. You get better loot depending on the difficulty, and then of course you can try the other classes. Like, there's a lot of replayability to this game if you're interested in just killing bugs non-stop. Of course, there are people who are going to get bored and get tired of just destroying the same stuff over and over, but that really wasn't me. I've played so much of EDF 5. I've really played a ton of the entire EDF series. Like, it just never gets old. I can just turn my brain off and just kill everything. Sometimes a buddy or two or three join me and we just all destroy everything. It's a blast. Is it repetitive? Does it get old? Sure. And it's not the most polished, it doesn't exactly look great, and sometimes the pathfinding can be a little whack, but it is just such a blast. It is so much fun, and I really just never get tired of it. EDF, man, one of my favorite series of all time. If you like shooters and haven't tried EDF, give it a shot. It's on PC and PS4. And hopefully we get EDF 6 sooner than later, because I've been really looking forward to this. The attitude looks really great. The attitude to all of these games is fantastic. It's all very goofy and cheesy and is very much inspired by Starship Troopers. In fact, Helldivers low-key took some stuff from EDF, I'm just saying, but either way, check out EDF. Great time. And so I thought I would include at least one indie game here, and it's an indie RPG. It's Bug Fables. Now, I very much love the old Paper Mario games, especially the Thousand Year Door, and I do like the new Paper Mario games, but they just don't hit the same way those old ones do, and that's where Bug Fables comes in. Bug Fables is a turn-based RPG that very much is in the style of the older Paper Mario games, and it's great. Not only does it play very similarly to Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, it actually expands on the gameplay and moves it forward. It brings it into a modern era, and then it is a very interesting, cute story and a great, simple aesthetic. This game, it just did not get the recognition it deserves. It's a really great RPG. And if you have any remote interest in the older Paper Mario games, you're gonna love this immediately. The gameplay is very familiar, but again, it moves it forward. Sure, when you're exploring around and interacting with the world, it is very similar to Paper Mario. In fact, it low-key looks like Paper Mario with the flat aesthetic and the way they turn around and everything. But the exploration and level design is actually very solid in this game. It really does come together. And then when it comes to the battle system, oh, it's great. Like the older Paper Mario games, it is turn-based, and you will have to do actions for every single move, such as timing your button press, but these actually get way more complicated than Paper Mario ever did, and they bring more buttons into it, and you're very engaged the entire time. The game also is challenge. There's a bunch of badges like Paper Mario to equip, and these are way more versatile than what Paper Mario ever had. And I quickly, actually low-key very quickly, became somewhat addicted to this battle system. Like, I was just having a ton of fun. I like how our trio of characters is very different from each other. They all have special moves, and some moves work better on certain enemies, and figuring out what the best strategy for every enemy is just incredibly fun. And the game constantly is mixing things up. They're introducing new enemies, environments, story elements. It just had a great pace to it, and I was engaged really the entire time. It's got a good length to it. There's a bunch of different side content. The gameplay, honestly, is kind of better than what even Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door had. Like, it expands on it, there's more depth, and it just never got old. Do I think the game is better than The Thousand Year Door? No, I don't think the charm, the story, the writing, and the characters are as good as that game. I mean, it's just kind of legendary in that sense, but the core gameplay, oh, it is very good. They really got the fundamentals down. They really understood what made Paper Mario so fun to begin with, and just, again, expanded on it, and you have one of the best indie RPGs you could play. Oh, and the soundtrack is pretty nice. This is a cute, fun little RPG that I think really got swept under the rug, and it really shouldn't be. Like, this is a solid enough game, and I hope we get a sequel in the future. It totally deserves it. These characters are great, the gameplay is solid enough, and it was just a really fun time. And so here's a game I wasn't entirely sure if I should include, but I did because I really do enjoy it, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I know that Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel and all of that isn't exactly under the radar, but I feel like this game kind of got swept under the rug and ignored, and for very good reason. I mean, the game that came out before this was Marvel's Avengers, a live service, multiplayer title by Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics that just kind of fell apart, and then like a year later we get another Marvel superhero game. Like, I'm good. But no, this game is actually what we all wanted the Marvel's Avengers game to be. It's a single-player, narrative-focused game that sees you playing exclusively as Star-Lord, and it actually is one of the best superhero games of the last, like, 10 years. Easy. I'd much rather play this game than Avengers or Suicide Squad, or really any modern superhero game outside of the Arkham or Spider-Man games. Like, this game really came together and was a huge surprise when I played it back then, and looking back, it's even better than I remember. The game tells a rather interesting story about the Guardians. I know we've all seen the Guardians plenty of times in the movies, but I feel like this is a much more accurate representation of the Guardians of the Galaxy than the movies ever had. This game really follows the comics more than anything else. It doesn't try to be like the MCU, and they actually do let it go pretty off the rails, and I really enjoy the story here. The characters are great, the Guardians themselves are awesome, but the side characters are really great, and I think the story is one of the best parts of this game, and that's good because there's a lot of dialogue and just a lot of storytelling here. The presentation is also great, the soundtrack is mostly licensed, and it's actually very good. When it comes to the gameplay, again, you only play as Star-Lord. They don't try to cram 4 different playstyles here. It is just Star-Lord, and it actually does feel nice. There is some exploration that is decent, but most of the gameplay is combat, and the combat's good. You can use your guns, there's plenty of other moves, you get to team up with the Guardians, and I think there's a decent amount of depth here. Like, sure, it's not the most complex and you can figure out how it works pretty easily, but it gets the job done. There's some satisfying moments, and I do like bringing in the other Guardians for combos, and the AI is actually pretty good in this game. Like, surprisingly good. Then the game actually just has really strong pacing and variety. You go to several different planets. You don't stick to just like one planet. No, you actually go to a bunch of different planets. There's plenty of gameplay that isn't combat that shows up, and along with the story, they really do keep things interesting throughout. I really wanted to see what was going to happen to these characters, and by the end of it, I was a little sad that it was over. I was like, wow, this actually is really good. I really enjoy these Guardians, and I'm sad we probably aren't going to get a sequel to this game. Square Enix said that it didn't sell very well, and then they sold the developer off, so I really doubt we're going to get a sequel. But if you are looking for one of the best superhero games of the last 10 years, if you're looking for easily the best rendition of the Guardians, this absolutely is the game for you. I'll be really recommending it forever because so many people just wrote this game off before it even came out, and no, it's actually good. It's really what we wanted from that Avengers game or the Suicide Squad game. I mean, this game just shits all over Suicide Squad. Like, go play it. So you knew a list like this I'd have to include at least one driving game. Now there have been plenty of under-the-radar driving games over the last decade, plenty of great indie ones and some AAA ones, but the game I'm going with is Wreckfest. Wreckfest was developed by Bugbear, the people who made the Flatout games, and this really is like the spiritual successor to Flatout, and while it is different from Flatout in various aspects, if you like those games or if you like Destruction Derby games, there is no better game than Wreckfest. This is easily one of, if not like the craziest game you could play in the modern era. It doesn't get as crazy as Flatout. I mean, there's no boosting and the sense of speed isn't as nuts as Flatout, but it is a pretty wild game. I mean, as the title implies, it's a bunch of junkers getting just absolutely wrecked here. There's no nice looking cars, there's no convertibles, there's nothing really fancy here. No, these are absolute junkers that look like they're just gonna fall apart at the seams, and you're just trying to race or destroy each other, and yeah, these cars just get totaled. The damage modeling is really like no other game. It is amazing. These cars just get completely annihilated piece by piece. They get torn apart, and it's just really cool to see these cars just get ripped apart by the seams, and sometimes you're the one doing the ripping and sometimes you're the one getting ripped. The damage modeling and everything to do with the car destruction is just peak. It really is. When it comes to the racing itself, you know, it's decent to good. It doesn't have an amazing sense of speed since you're in a bunch of junkers, but I still think it's good. It feels nice. There's plenty of good tracks, and I think the customization you have with your car is pretty cool. The game has a decent length to it as well. There's a lot of events to do, and not all of it is in the car. There are some other events like where you're in the lawnmower, and these are all right, but it all comes together to create this unique, different experience from really really any other modern driving game. You know what this game has that most modern driving games don't have? A personality, an attitude, hell, even a soul. The Flatout games had it, and this game has it too. A lot of driving games, they just don't have the personality that this game has. I mean, that's really what a lot of Destruction Derby games have, and Destruction Derby games are very, very rare these days. So when one shows up, I take notice. In fact, I took so much notice of this, I actually did kickstart it many, many years ago, but when it finally came out, oh, it was so worth it. This game is so good, and even nowadays, it really is one of my favorite modern driving games. And I think the main reason this game didn't take off and it is underrated or a hidden gem is because it is so different from really all the other driving games on the market. It's not a sim, it is very arcade, but it's also not like a kart racer. And the game visually is very realistic. It's not super cartoony or wild like Cruisin', and so it just kind of falls into this odd position. But despite all of that, I totally think this game is worth playing if you like driving games, especially if you like Flatout or Destruction Derby games. It really doesn't get better than this when it comes to modern Destruction Derby games. The game is just a whole ton of fun. And so last RPG of the day, we have The World Ends With You Neo. Now, the original World Ends With You was a pretty popular DS game. It sold well, it did well, and a lot of people still look fondly back on it. Sure, it was very gimmick heavy with the DS, but it was still a good game. And so when a sequel came out, I got pretty excited, and a number of people did, but then it came out, and I feel like it just went poof. I never heard like anything about it, and you know, a few years later, I rarely ever hear anything about it. I hear more about that original game than the sequel, and I totally do not understand why. Like, maybe this game just had awful marketing, or it really is just way too niche, but I thought this game was great. I actually like it more than the original game even, and I think the way that they adapted the gameplay from the DS game to, you know, a modern video game is actually really well done. This game has a fantastic story, a great art style, and some really solid gameplay. It genuinely baffles me that this game did not take off like at all. When it comes to the story, the game is actually a sequel to the original game. It doesn't seem like it at first, but it involves the Reaper's game, and yeah, it is a sequel. You don't need to have played the original game. They very much do explain everything to you in a way that does make sense, and I would say it's very newcomer friendly. But if you played the original, you'll probably get a lot more out of the story, and you'll immediately see some of the cameos and nods and winks, and that's cool and all, but the story is actually very well done. This game has some really good characters, good developments, and it keeps things interesting the entire time. There's some really excellent twists here. And when it comes to the gameplay, it isn't crazy different from the original either, where you explore modern day Tokyo and you get into fights with creatures and you equip pins and badges to do attacks. There's tons of pins you get in this game, meaning that there's tons of different attacks and you link them to certain buttons, so you actually do end up creating your own combos, and the combat feels nice in this game. It has a very good flow to it, and there is some strategy here. Certain pins are definitely better against other enemies, like some of the bosses, or when you go up against the other humans. Like, yeah, there's some strategy, there's some depth here. It's not crazy complex, but I actually think the combat is good. Exploring around Tokyo is good. The presentation is very good. I really love how this game looks. It has a great aesthetic, and the soundtrack. Ooh, the soundtrack is fantastic. It was great in the original game. It might be even better here. It is so good. I also love this game's vibe and atmosphere. It really feels like they captured that original game and brought it again to the modern day. I know some people don't care for the writing, but I really love the attitude this game has, and it just puts off an excellent vibe. More people need to play this. This game should not have been as forgotten as quickly as it was. It's a great sequel. It's low-key better than the original game. It's much more accessible than the original game, and it tells a compelling different narrative. I'm certain the game didn't sell well. I mean, with Square Enix, nothing really seems to sell well for them, it feels like, but I'm certain the game didn't sell well, and I don't know if we'll ever see another game, and that's a real shame, because this game, it really does slap, and it seems like it was just completely forgotten. And so to wrap things up, I'm not going to finish with just one game, but actually an entire series. I'm going to recommend the Danganronpa series. I realize this might not be the most underground series, but man, this series just deserves more love than it gets. It is a visual novel series, so I get why some people are hesitant, but this is like the best visual novel series I have ever played. I currently am playing the Ace Attorney games, and some of those are really good, so maybe come back in 6 months and I might say something different, but at the moment, yeah, Danganronpa is like the best visual novel series of them all. It's about murders and investigations amongst some high school students, and that's really all I'm going to say. I think all of these games, the visual novel games, are all excellent, and they all tell incredibly compelling narratives. I mean, with them being visual novels, the story needs to be top-notch, and it absolutely is top-notch with some really lovable, great characters. All of these games have great casts, like the characters are just very well done. And thankfully the gameplay isn't too mundane, there is actually some interactivity. It's not like you're just reading a book the entire time, there is actually a bit to this. There's puzzle solving, investigations, and of course trials to figure out who actually did the murder, and some of these trials do go on pretty long. But despite that, something all three games have in common is that the pacing is actually very well done. They keep things very interesting throughout, and they really just throw you into it pretty much immediately in all of them, which is quite nice. I think the art style is also great. I love how these games look visually. Sure, they don't, wow you, they don't look absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they started basically as handheld games, but I think there is charm in its simplicity, and I really like the art style. And the music is phenomenal in all of these games. The music is just stupid good in this series. It's really great. Funny enough, Digimon Cyber Sleuth has the same composer, so that is probably why that game is a good OST. But yeah, the music is very good, the story is interesting, the gameplay is not super boring, there actually is a bit to it, there is some decent puzzle solving here, and I just really enjoy where these games go. When it comes to my favorite, well, I'm not going to tell you because I actually ranked these games a few years ago and I recommend you see that. I also go a lot more in depth with each game. Just know that I think all three are very much worth playing. If you've ever been on the fence about visual novels or you've wanted to try one, Danganronpa I think is the perfect game to try. It was really the first visual novel I ever played. I mean, I knew about them, but I'd never sat down and played all the way through one until I played Danganronpa, and it made me a fan of the genre. So I think it's a great introduction or gateway to visual novels. I mean, it worked for me. But also if you're looking for a different kind of murder mystery series that is very much all over the place, more than even Ace Attorney, yeah, this has got you covered. There is also the anime, but as someone who's watched it, I couldn't really recommend it, to be honest. I didn't really like it. I don't know if that's a hot take, but what I'm recommending today is the three games. That's Danganronpa 1, 2, and V3. They are all available on PlayStation, Steam, and Switch, and very much are worth your time. All of these games are worth your time. I think they're all good, and it's a shame that any of these games are on a list like this, to be honest. They deserve more recognition. They shouldn't be underrated or forgotten or thrown under the rug. And while none of them are perfect, absolute must-plays, drop everything to play this game, not every game is like that, and it's okay to play games that aren't like that. I know so many people, they only play the 10-10-10s, and I'm like, okay, well, you gotta try some other games. Here's some games you should try. If you made it to this part of the video, comment concrete, as in what's in the ground or buildings. That's our secret code word that you made it to the end of the video. Get a little heart from me. Let me know also any games that you think are hidden gems. I'm always looking for more games, even if I am feeling a little burnt out. Always looking for more games, and hope everyone has a safe night, so bye-bye now.